Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People Policy Institute and our daily look and inside analysis of what's happening in Israel's war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Today, we're joined by two panelists, Yedidya Stern, Professor Yedidya Stern, the president of JPPI, and Eric Goldstein, who is the head of the New York Jewish Federation, the UJA. There's a lot going on and a lot to talk about when it comes to the war. Obviously, today, the news is, of course, on the battlefields of Gaza, as well as everything that's happening inside Israel. A drone landed apparently a couple hours ago in Eilat. There's the fighting that's going on, of course, inside Gaza and continued rocket fire and reports that we're just hearing now recently about what's happening with the hostages in Qatar, where the heads of the CIA and the Mossad are apparently meeting as we speak with the Prime Minister of Qatar in an attempt to secure maybe the release of some of the 240 hostages. And I thought that, Yedidya, we'd start with you. We're now in our fifth week of this war, and Israel is kind of falling into in past conflicts, we see this where you kind of fall back into the routine. I see it on the streets here of Jerusalem. We don't live that far away from one another, but if in the first few weeks of the war, empty, no one's out, you weren't even sure, is it okay to go have a coffee at a coffee shop, right? Is it okay to live your life like it used to be before the war? Well, it seems that things are kind of getting back to normal and the country is falling into something of a routine, even though you have a number of children who are still fighting in Gaza, even though 240 hostages are still being held in Gaza, and this war is still raging. So how do you understand where we are in this point? And maybe as we look forward, there's a number of big challenges that are ahead. End mechanism, hostages, what does victory look like? So I just wanted to kind of get some of your thoughts on all of those different items. I think you're muted, Yedidya.
Thank you, Yaakov, and hi, Eric. Shalom, everybody. It's true in a way, 5 weeks is a long period of time, but I don't think Israel is the same, obviously. And I would like to talk about three aspects. Each one of them is of importance in my eye about Israeli society, the Israeli situation right now, not about the war itself, but about the reflections of the war on us, Israelis here. Israelis enjoy or do not enjoy from a tough image, a sabra with the spikes outwards, self-confident, cynical to some degree, assertive, and so on. All this, Yaakov and Eri, are not in existence anymore. Israelis today, November 2023, are completely different from the usual image of Israelis. I think it's quite impossible to find an Israeli who is cynical today. I think we tend to externalize our feelings. People are crying a lot in Israel today because of what happened, because of the fear of today's fights in Gaza. And generally speaking, it's an existentially different situation. We externalize our feelings. And I feel that we are tasting now the soft inner part of the sabra. It became more prominent in Israeli public arena. In a way, because we are involved in violence, Israel turned from a tough place to a sensitive place. And it's very touching to me. That's my one observation. Another observation has to do with the Israeli famous self-confidence. We know it all. We can fix everything. We're on top of things. We are smarter than anybody. Well, I think we are questioning now this issue, and I want to touch upon a sensitive observation. Many in Israel associate whatever is happening now today or whatever happened in Simchat Torah with the Holocaust. Many compare between the terrorists of the Hamas and the Nazis.
Today, by the way, is the anniversary of Kristallnacht, so you have a lot of even more comparisons that are going on as we speak.
Exactly. 9th of 11 is the Kristallnacht. That's right. And in the Kristallnacht, I think about 200 Jews were murdered. Now we're talking about many, many more. Nevertheless, I believe that the comparison is, first of all, not true. Secondly, is showing something to us about ourselves. You know, Hamas obviously committed a terrible, terrible pogrom at us Israelis, but they cannot realize the Holocaust. There's a huge difference between the Jewish world that is not protected by a state, not anchored in a state, and the current situation. And I think we have to put our finger on this difference and not to accept the comparison, not to accept the comparison. I think that comparison shows us that to some degree, Israel is still, it is a huge, strong superpower in our region, but our self-confidence is not as we think it is or used to be. I believe that it turns out that 75 years of sovereignty may be a short period of time for a deep change of mind about the Jewish situation. And I think we have to realize this. It's important to understand this. Third and last point, Yaakov, I want to talk about Israeli solidarity. I talked about sensitivity, I talked about self-confidence, and I would like to talk about solidarity. This is an amazing moment in our national life where Israelis are discovering the other Israeli tribe as a brother in a real sense. I mean, we all know it. I mean, we talk about it. Still feeling it is an amazing feeling. After the last decade or so, where we were fighting each other, not accepting each other, showing the other to be wrong, now it's very clear that the tribes of Israel are functioning together for the common good. I'll give you an example. You know, on the 7th of October, Sunday, just after the Simchat Torah, about 200 later on, 300 southern Israelis, civil Israelis became soldiers, like 4 of my kids and 2 of my sons-in-law. And the state of Israel wasn't prepared for it, logistically. What does it really mean? And there was a shortage of many things. For example, food. So one specific restaurant in the midst of Tel Aviv, Ha'achim, the brothers, which is obviously important name for what I'm trying to say, the brother restaurant, which is very well known in the center of Tel Aviv, a non-kosher place, took upon itself, nobody asked them, to deal with the issue. We would like to supply all these soldiers great food, nutritious food. They should not live just on pita and bread. And from nowhere, a huge organization came out. Money came from simple people. Everybody collaborated. Until now, they pushed to the frontiers 250,000 hot meals from one restaurant in Tel Aviv, everything based on volunteers and donation. Just one expression of many of the network that we are rebuilding it. So I think that, to sum it up, I think that the state of Israel suffered from some kind of heart rhythm disturbances in the last decade, and we received the electric shock of this war by the Hamas, and now the Israeli heart works great with strong united beats, and we came back to ourselves.
So Eric, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. I saw you just a few days into the war. You were here already on the ground. You had been here, I think, over Sukkot, and you were still here and already jumping into action and doing what the UJA knows how to do so well and helping Israel. And I'm curious, you know, one of the things that I've been noticing a lot, obviously with the explosion of anti-Semitism around the world, and definitely in New York as well, is that if we thought, for example, that Israel is Israel and diaspora Jews are diaspora Jews, and they're not necessarily connected, this is a perfect example of how whether diaspora Jews want it or don't want it, what happens here in Israel impacts them right away, and will lead, fairly or unfairly, it doesn't make a difference, will lead to the anti-Semitism that they're now experiencing. Obviously, unfairly is what I would say. but there's that direct connection, and we're joined at the hip that way, and we can't look at it as two separate entities or two separate peoples. It happens to be one people who are connected, and what we do to one, what happens to one of us impacts the other. So I'm curious, how you view this situation, what's happening on the ground in New York right now, where things are. I mean, we know campuses being hostile. We see rallies. We see people pulling off posters. You have that big rally coming up next week in Washington, D.C., hoping to reenact the march from back for the Soviet Jews.
Sure.
A lot to talk about.
Look, first of all, a lot of the things that you described about the current reality of Israel exist here too. We've done two major rallies, one at Doug Hammarskjöld Plaza on October 10, 25,000 people, and we had one Central Park West with around 10, 12,000 people for the Shloshim. And the sense of solidarity of the New York Jewish community, which we all know is not typically very solid. There's enormous difference. I've done many events with the Jewish community before where, who will be on the stage, what rabbi with what rabbi, I'm not going to get on this stage. They had none of those issues. Those issues were off the table. Everyone said, where do you want me to be across the denominational spectrum, and I'll be there. I think that obviously there are edges. It's not a monolithic community, but the vast majority of the Jewish community now is very much connected, very much agree about Israel's absolute right to defeat Hamas, that no country should have to live with that kind of entity at its border. And that's normative. So even the more progressive Jewish community, I'm not saying the extreme progressive community, are largely in the same place. Again, more or less focus on the grieving of innocent civilians in Gaza, the Palestinians. And, we keep saying that we have to be grieving the innocent civilians in Gaza, recognizing the callousness of how they've been used by Hamas. But there's enormous community coming together. The other thing we're saying is, again, as sort of a little bit like what Yedidya was referring to, apathy, which we always talk about as being a problem in the Jewish community. Apathy is not currently our problem. People from every walk of Jewish life who have been sort of connected, not really connected, are reaching out and saying they're getting much more activist around campus. They want to figure out how they can do things. They don't want to be silent. There's a dramatic, people want to be more openly Jewish, even though there's fear about, being openly Jewish by more people today. There's a guy I know, very prominent person, who's now wearing a yarmulke, except when he eats his cheeseburger, because he wants to show that he is proudly, publicly Jewish in this moment. So I don't know how sustaining this is. Will this continue? How will we redraw the Jewish map of New York, which is vast? But in the moment, there's enormous coming together of the community, and we're seeing it philanthropically. Even though the spigot is getting a little, and we should talk about that, but in the first 3 weeks, we put $10 million from our endowment on October 7th, the first time UJ ever met on a Shabbat, and we were, I think, among the first big dollars into Israel on October 8th. But since then, the community we've raised over $135 million from the New York Jewish community, and it's still coming in. So there's a sense of let's do, and obviously we know Magen David Adom, many other organizations have gotten an enormous philanthropic connection. So this is a moment that we should focus on and try to do what we can to sustain.
The activity, by the way, just of UJA, this $135 million that you mentioned. So that goes, is it towards specific targets? It's towards restoration, rehabilitation?
So look, one of the challenges we're going to have in the community, and we know this with every crisis, and this is obviously a very, very dramatic crisis, is there are immediate needs, there are intermediate needs, and there are long-term needs, like the day after needs. We currently don't know what the day after needs are going to be. We don't know what's going to happen in the North, West Bank, mixed cities. there's so much we don't know, but we know there will be a day after. And what we also know, and again, recent history, we just happened to have had a group in Warsaw focusing on the Jews of Ukraine 10 days ago. And there's, we've seen now what we call responsive philanthropy, expressive philanthropy. People just want to do and they give. But a lot of the dollars are spent in the immediate and frankly, even misspent in the immediate, not the most effective way. But responsive philanthropy is not necessarily responsible philanthropy, where you focus and keep enough to help support philanthropic ways. Philanthropy isn't government. You can't substitute for government, and government has been too absent to too large an extent in Israel right now. But at the end of the day, philanthropy needs to supplement government. And when we do have day after needs, there needs to be sufficient resource philanthropically to help support. So, we've now, in terms of, we've spent roughly $40 million of the 135 plus 10 million from our endowment to this point. And of that nearly $40 million, it's gone to communities in the South, the Moshavim, the regional councils, who know the community, who know how to address immediate needs. Also the northern communities, trauma organizations, first responders, like $6 million to the key hospitals who are, very significant need of equipment. So we have a very significant planning team in Israel, and we have a significant planning team in New York, and they're literally working around the clock. I mean, one goes to sleep, the other wakes up, and we're trying to be as responsive to the moment as we can.
Yedidia, one of the things that happens also after 5 weeks in this war, and we're seeing this already now, I just saw before Israel starts to talk about now a 4-hour humanitarian window or corridor every day. As the fighting continues, but it also, we start to think about the day after, right? And the exit strategy, or what the end mechanism might be. And here, one of the big challenges that I envision, for example, is defining what victory means for us in Israel, right? Like I could see a scenario where Israel succeeds in eliminating the leader of Hamas and weakening, of course, many of the Hamas, killing a lot of Hamas fighters, degrading a lot of Hamas military capabilities, but not getting back the hostages. Or on the flip side, getting back some of the hostages, but the leadership of Hamas remains. How do you, so for some people, let me just add one element. For some people, they'll say, no, it's what we really are after, rationally speaking, we need to bring down Hamas's rule. We need a new entity governing Gaza. But there's a large portion of the public here that will say, without the hostages, there's no victory. There's the rational and there's the emotional. How does a government navigate between those two different, very, very different priorities?
Yeah, that's the main question right now. I think it's a big question for the whole region. We need to have an image of a victory which will be undisputable in the region and also in the world. Israeli deterrence is crucial for the future, and the image of a victory is the best weapon we have for regaining the deterrence that to some degree we lost. Therefore, it's crucial to define and then to market the idea of victory in a way that is attainable. To me, saying that the only victory is when we bring back all the captives is a huge mistake. Because this goal, obviously, this is the main goal. This is one of the most important things for us, for every Israeli and every human person on the globe should adopt it as a goal. But to define success or failure by this is a major mistake. Why is it so? Because we know that maybe even already they smuggled some of our people out of Gaza. We don't know.
Right.
And if they're not in Gaza, period. And also, most likely, some of the people are dead. We don't know that they are dead. They might be dead, missing. And the Hamas, we know the way they act. They will not tell us. We all remember Ron Arad for so many years. Nobody knows. So if you define a victory by this specific, very important element, this is a mistake. Because in reality, It's tough to say, tough to admit, but in reality, the likelihood is that not everybody will come back. And we're playing into the hands of our enemies if this is the definition of victory. However, there are many other things that are attainable, that we should say, this is the goal, and test us. For example, obviously dismantling Hamas, killing the top brass of Hamas. This should be a specific criteria that we should go on and achieve, eliminate them. On top of it, I believe, and this is not a revenge, we should not, God forbid that we'll think in terms of revenge. We have to think in terms of victory. So victory may turn out to be to bring to justice or to kill every terrorist who entered Israel in Simchat Torah. Put it on the table. Maybe it will not happen tomorrow. It will take time. Everybody remembers what Israel did with the terrorists in München. Israel, Golda, made the decision that nobody will survive. It took time, but it happened. I think we should declare this is our purpose. Either come to Israel or we'll catch you or put you into trial. And if this is impossible, there's a new mental equation. If you killed an Israeli, you should be brought into justice or be killed. No other choice. But maybe the most important part, Yaakov, I know this is not the answer people usually say, but that's my opinion. I think victory will be not in the Gaza. Victory will be in the Western Negev. Victory will be in Be'eri. We should disarm, obviously, Gaza Strip, and we should rebuild the whole area in a very serious chalutzi, way, bring back Zionism. Some of the kids, including people we know personally, they come to us and they tell us, listen, this is our generation's, test. We are going to spend a year or two rebuilding the area. This is eventually the definition of a victory in a serious way.
Yeah. By the way, you pushed back on the Holocaust comparison, but whenever you would talk to, I don't know, not all, but a lot of Holocaust survivors would always tell you what's the victory is the family that they created afterwards, is the rebuilding that came afterwards. So the rebuilding is obviously, it's deep Jewish significance.
Maybe I'll be personal for a moment, if you allow me. You see my beard, that's because I just finished a Shiva for my mom. She was 104. And her generation went through the whole Zionistic journey. Before the Shoah, being pioneer, the Shoah, building the country, building the state. And her funeral was part of current huge episode in the Jewish journey. And we have to see it as part of an ongoing journey. And our generation is facing this challenge of terror. We are strong, we are able, we'll overcome it. And we will, Ben Gurion's idea was rebuilding the Negev. Okay, let's do it now.
Right.
So, let me just say one thing about that. I remember in the wake of 9/11, and this is in so many ways much more profound and trauma for a country than 9/11. And we were changed by 9/11 in America, of course. But, in the immediate aftermath, people said, we will never rebuild downtown. We'll never come back to live in downtown. And this was obviously September 11th. By December, rents were rising again downtown. And now, it's a vibrant area. That said, the last major violence south, summer of 2014, after the 3 yeshiva boys were kidnapped, killed, I went to Nachalos and Kfar Aza because the idea was, how do you incent and you motivate the community to move back? And you still heard the narrative then, 95% heaven, 5% hell is sort of the calculus of living in these beautiful, beautiful border towns in the South. The cheshbon has to have changed dramatically, given the horrific, the scale of what happened on October 7th. And I just hope that the same, but to your point, it requires certainly the restoration of a sense of deterrence and a restoration of a sense of security. Hey, did you know, two of my four kids and a daughter-in-law live in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and their whole sense, I think, of why they made Aliyah and their conception of the country they were joining, Jews don't hide, proud, militarily superior, if not invincible on some level, has been shredded. And, again, it's hard to see past a crisis when you're in the middle of it, but you just have to hope that Israel does what it does to restore that sense of deterrence and therefore that sense of security, and people are prepared to move and rebuild these beautiful, beautiful border towns in the south.
Eric, one of the other things that comes out of this war, I think, to an extent, is obviously we're shifting the paradigm of how security vis-a-vis Gaza has been until now, right? This policy of containment will no longer exist. Israel will have to have security control. I think that is accepted now across the board. But I also wonder if there's not a need for a shift in the paradigm also when it comes to Israel's relationship with diaspora Jewry, right? If people in Israel were writing off diaspora Jews as unaffiliated, moving away from Israel, not connected, the way that Jews around the world have stood with Israel, just the UJA is one large but small example of what's been happening across the globe, of how people have been coming out despite anti-Semitic attacks and despite the threats to themselves and raising money, coming to Israel, solidarity missions, rallies, and what's happening next week in DC will hopefully be a big one. What would you want to see change in that respect?
Look, there is the real opportunity here for a reset moment. We know that over the last many years, the relationship, again, this is not monolithically true, but the relationship with large segments of the American Jewish community in Israel has frayed. American Jews are generally democratic, capital D, liberal, and Israel is turning more and more rightward. Now, again, it's easy to be pious from the safety of security of the Upper West Side, very, very different in Israel. But I think that there were these growing fractures, and we were beginning to address this, for years now, and part of it is also Israeli Jewish education, or the education in the Mamlechti system, where they learn about dead diaspora Jews, they learn about the Shoah, but they never really learn anything about the existing diaspora Jewry. And so I think a lot of people have no clue about, and they assume reform is like a slur and not a real religious movement with significant following and real ruach and content. So there's the opportunity now to reset as they see all of these expressions of support. And it goes the other way too. As American Jewry becomes more insecure in America and more aggressive in saying, I'm going to call out anti-Semitism on college campuses, and I'm not going to be silent about workplace environment, and I'm going to insist that my C-suite executives who called out and condemned, George Floyd killing, lots of anti-Asian hate, I want you to do that now. So as they're feeling more insecure, I think they understand more about what Israel's lived for a long time. I actually think there's an opportunity to engage around that too. I have to tell you that the cascading impact and how quickly we've been focused about growing anti-Semitism and concerns about it, but I've had dozens of people who call, we're talking about many of them, the most successful, prominent, leading, very secure lives in New York, who said, I've never been so fearful of being a Jew in New York. I told my children to take their Magen Davids and put them inside so people don't see. And we need to do what we can to provide a sense of security here too, like Israel does, to say you could live proudly public Jewish lives in New York, and it's critical we do so, and that we don't give into, there's a day of rage, the Friday after October 7, and we have a very significant community security initiative now focused on the Jewish community. We did a webinar with all of the day schools, the yeshivot, the shuls, the Jewish community centers, with the mayor, the head of NYPD, the police commissioner, and there was a singular message that no credible threat in New York, take your children to school with calm, go to, Kabbalat Shabbat on Friday night, go to shul on Shabbat, everything is good. And notwithstanding that, there were schools that stayed closed. There were shuls that only did online, in the non-Orthodox communities. So we have a significant challenge now to sustain a sense of security in the largest Jewish community in the world, so that people feel comfortable engaging publicly, proudly in Jewish life. But I do think, back to your original question, Yaakov, there's an opportunity now, a real opportunity to reset. I think Israelis are seeing how Americans are supportive. Americans are understanding more what insecurity feels like and how you need to be a little bit more aggressive in responding. I hope that we take advantage of the moment.
And Yedidia, there's a similar opportunity to an extent, although I don't like that word necessarily, opportunity out of a war, but it still is an opportunity for that reset here in Israeli civil society, right? Where we were just 5 weeks ago, ripping each other apart. And we know how quickly we can fall back into that. It could happen so fast. The war could end, and the next day we're back to the Bibi yes, Bibi no. The line is so narrow that we could very quickly. How do we not fall back into it? How do we stay focused on the good, on the positive, on the rebuilding, the reconstruction?
First of all, I think that Eric's description of what's going on in New York City is true also here. I think that if some Jews abroad perceived themselves as citizens of the world who happen to be Jews, and some Israelis perceived themselves as citizens of Israel who happen to be Jews, what is happening now may change that drastically. Americans of Jewish descent at Harvard, they know now that they are Jews, and that it becomes important for them. And the same here in Israel. I can tell you that I just met yesterday an Israeli prominent, a billionaire, an Israeli billionaire, one of the barons of the high tech, in February this year, when he was very angry, like many of us, about the legal, revolution. He announced publicly that he's moving abroad for good. I'm not going to pay taxes in Israel. I'm moving. One of the richest people in Israel today. He was saying it publicly. I met with him yesterday, and he told me that the war made it clear to him how Jewish he is, not only an Israeli, and it made clear to him that he wants to fight for Israel. He vowed not to leave Israel, and he vowed to be part of the fight over the character of the state of Israel. So I feel that Judaism as a nation, as a religion, as a culture, has become a common focus of identity for all of us, abroad and in Israel. Now, regarding your question, Yaakov, how can we maintain the solidarity and not fall back to previous disputes? Yeah, the threat of this is very clear. And, JPPI, we are conducting surveys, and we see that the solidarity right now is not solving the main issues that we are fighting over them. What we do need, I believe, is rules for the game that will enable us in the future, in the near future and later on, to conduct the disputes which will not disappear in a proper way. This is what we call here, a thin constitution. There is no remedy that will solve everything, but we need to have rules for conducting decently the Israeli dispute. And we are up to it. And I just want to add something else, if you don't mind. The opportunity that Eric was mentioning of, being one nation, what we call peoplehood, it is up to us to educate young Israelis of the importance of the other half of the Jewish nation, those who are not Israelis. And we are very much committed, JPPI is committed to do it. And I think whatever is happening right now will illustrate the importance of the other part, not only giving money, but protecting us and helping Joe Biden and the administration to go on with their support to Israel. And as an Israeli, I want to thank Eric and our brothers abroad for being there for us.
Yeah. I want to thank both
you
of
for
you.
being there for us.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Yedidia. Thank you very much, Eric. Good luck with the big rally this coming week. I know I said this yesterday, and I'll say it again to end this week, but that when it's funny, you know, as Jews, you look here, and of course, very concerned about Israeli Jews in Israel. But Israeli Jews look over the ocean and see what's happening in France and London and New York and what's happening to college students, and they get worried about the Jews over there. And that's the beauty of being part of the Jewish people, is no matter where we are, we have that connection and that concern for one another. I want to thank everyone, all our listeners and all our viewers, for joining us here at JPPI. We will be taking a break, as we do for the last 5 weeks, for Shabbat. We hope and pray for a quiet weekend, and we will be back on Sunday for another week of inside analysis of Israel's war